Hi, my name is Christine Barker, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have been invited by the Boulder Bookstore to tell you about my book, Third Girl from the Left. But before I start, I have to say that I had 3 siblings who went to school in Boulder, which was very exciting for them, and I loved to visit them. But I had gone on to New York because my dream was to be a dancer. I went to New York, and I was originally from Santa Fe, New Mexico. You can imagine how different that was. I started out the Salvation Army Home for Girls, but I made my way day by day, lesson by lesson, and I did finally make it to Broadway. I got a part in A Chorus Line, which was a very big show and a very, very exciting event, and I felt like all my dreams had come true. But then the AIDS crisis hit, and it impacted everybody I knew and loved, especially my brother. My brother was a gay man who had been in the closet because he was a lawyer, and as a lawyer in the 1970s and 80s, he could have been fired for being gay. But he met his business and life partner, Perry Ellis, and together they built the Perry Ellis fashion label. So my story is about what happens to a young woman who goes to New York to achieve her dreams and gets her dreams, and then something totally beyond her control changes her life and changes the lives of everybody she knows and loves.
Steve, what inspired you to write this book?
I actually don't think I was ever really inspired. I think that I was compelled. I felt that I had to tell the story. It had to be shared. And that feeling only grew because I became aware as the years went by, and it has been 30 years, that people don't really understand, especially younger generations. They don't understand about what it was like when AIDS hit and how there was no information. There was no internet. And newspapers were afraid to report on anything that had to do with gay life, and they called AIDS the gay disease, unfortunately and disgustingly. But there wasn't anything out there. Nowadays, people seem to think you just take a pill. And people also seem to think that gay life was not as difficult as it was. So I really wanted to tell the story.
Do you remember the first time you heard about AIDS?
Yes, actually, I heard about AIDS in the wings of the theater. You know, it's dark, they're about to call places, and, you know, we're all getting ready to go on stage, and it's very, people just sometimes whisper or something, and all the whispers were about people getting sick, and it didn't make sense. We didn't understand. And then it was about people who died. We didn't understand that either, and really nobody really understood kind of what was going on. But I've been asked to read an excerpt from my book, so I thought, since that was a question, that I'd read a little piece about how my brother told me that he had AIDS. But before I do that, I just sort of have to explain that I had to cut it down so that it would only be, 5 minutes long. So you see what a book looks like, but these pages, I had to go back to my original manuscript and kind of mark it up. And so you're seeing what an original manuscript looks like when your editors send it back and everything to you, and there's all these lines on it. So you'll bear with me as I read and cut and read and cut. The scene takes place, I often sort of had a late afternoon snack, like a tea time kind of thing, because the show, I'd have to be at the theater by 6, and you can't eat a big dinner before you do a show. And so I often sort of did this tea time, and my brother kind of liked that. And so he invited me over to his apartment and said, let's have tea. And so I accepted. The tea table was set when we arrived. Laughlin bent to light the fire in the parlor fireplace. He struck the match with a broad, sweeping gesture, like that of a conductor calling to order all the discordant elements in front of him. "There are 2 things I need to tell you," he said, "and they're both kind of sad." When Laughlin talked to his 12-year-old daughter, Kate, he used the word "kind of sad" as a preference before explaining something disturbing. But he didn't seem disturbed, and I wasn't Kate. He was smiling, unfolding his large linen napkin carefully before laying it across his knees. The first thing is that Suzanne and Jeffrey have separated. Well, Suzanne is my sister and Jeffrey was her husband. My brother went on to describe the fact that Jeffrey had moved out and that they were struggling. I was shocked and felt so sad for her. So I asked, is there something I can do? And he said, no, Suzanne's going to be fine. She's a well-respected attorney with her own client base. In the long run, I think she's going to be better off. And the second thing I have to tell you is that I have AIDS. He said it casually, tacking it onto the list about Suzanne. And as much as I had imagined in late night fits of terror that he might one day say those words, I had never anticipated the horror of hearing them spoken with such banality. I was stunned, and his eyes were stoned. He looked at me, then said, remember when I was in the hospital last fall? Yes. Last October, he had told me Laughlin had been in the hospital because he had mono, and he was put on a course of antibiotics that needed to be administered through an IV. At the time, it never occurred to me that it might have something to do with AIDS because AIDS was so obscure. Even when I had visited at the hospital and there was a yellow paper caution sign taped to his door, it didn't occur to me. I'd never seen anything like that. And I didn't think about it because I was struck by the VIP suite, which looked less like a hospital room than a hotel room. It had dark wooden floors, brass knobs, and heavy floral drapes. And Laughlin whipped his hand in the air and said, welcome to the most expensive East Side hotel and spa. This is more expensive than Claridge's, if you can believe it. The whole atmosphere was so lighthearted. Nothing in his attitude or appearance made me suspect something serious, though he did mention that I should keep the fact secret, that he was in the hospital and nobody could know because he was in the middle of some very big business deals. Then he went on to describe some health problems going back to January 1983, when a blood test showed impaired immunity. Since then, he'd had 3 opportunistic infections: pneumocystis, Kaposi sarcoma, and shingles. The combination of those 3 illnesses were necessary to meet the CDC's determination that he had AIDS. Even though the medical community had isolated the virus in April, they had yet to develop a test to produce a scientifically accurate diagnosis. Consequently, some very sick men may have AIDS, but if they didn't have the combination of those 3 illnesses, the CDC didn't give them an AIDS diagnosis. Not that there was a vaccine or specific medication to treat it anyway. Patients were given only medications that treated illnesses arising from immunodeficiency. Look, Laughlin continued, AIDS is like polio. And polio was eradicated, and the same thing's going to happen to people who have AIDS. Then he added, I don't want you to tell anyone. I'm not going to tell anyone. Jesus, you don't have to worry about that. He says, no one can know right now, and he was emphatic. Look what's happening. New York's too small. There's too much at stake. And he's right. Laughlin was a clever lawyer turned businessman who in little more than 3 years had expanded the Perry Ellis business into close to a $750 million enterprise, all of which depended upon Perry's name and designs. We could go down in a day. Contracts can be canceled. Hundreds could lose their jobs. This isn't just about me, he said. It's much bigger than that. It's everything I've built. You have to swear. I swear, I said. And he was right. The environment was changing rapidly. And without a doubt, the fear of AIDS was as threatening to businesses as AIDS itself. And it was especially important and especially impacted any business that was run or populated by gay men.
You addressed some very difficult experiences. What impact did that have on you while you were writing it? Also, what do you hope readers take away?
Well, when writing it, I have a background in theater, and so I know how to access memories and I know how to access emotions. But even without that, I think that anybody who experiences extremes in life the extremes of the great joy of being on Broadway and dancing in a show, and then the extremes of the despair that AIDS brought with it. Those kinds of things stay with you. I can still hear my brother screaming his way out of this world. I guess that's just the best way to describe it. When you have an experience like that, you don't forget it. Also, then in terms of writing it, I was really determined to approach the undiscussables. There are so many things, especially back then, but even now today, that people have a hard time discussing. People don't want to discuss sex, they don't want to discuss drugs, they don't want to discuss failure, and they certainly don't want to discuss death. And I think it's really important that we do start to discuss those things. So I put them in the book, hoping that maybe they would prompt conversations among people. I think the other part of the question is about the impact and what I'm kind of doing. I think that telling a story and writing about it is different than experiencing it. And the telling part and putting it together as a book is really the art part. And it's sort of deciding how best to tell it. And so even as I was accessing very sad, terrible times, I always had the feeling that there was somebody who wanted to listen. And I hope that that's actually my reader now.
The last question we have for you is, you began as a dancer and you were a dancer on Broadway. Do you still dance?
Yes, but only for me and my family or my friends when I'm at parties. And sometimes I put on Adele and I play her as loud as I can, and I just rock through the house, with everything. And I guess if I have another secret dream, I'd be like one of those girl backup singers, who's really rocking out and just being able to use her whole body in full expression to express the joy of what music and all of that is about.